Σας και καλώς ορίσατε στο Δια Ταύτα. Απόψε φιλοξενούμε στο πρόγραμμα μια παραδοσιακή φίλη της Κύπρου, γνωστή για τους αγώνες της, την κυρία Pauline. Για όσους δεν γνωρίζουν ακριβώς την ιδιότητά της, η κυρία Green είναι Αγγλίδα Ευρωβουλευτής και ηγείται της σοσιαλιστικής ομάδος στο Ευρωκοινοβούλιο. Αυτή η ιδιότητα είναι ιδιαίτερα σημαντική, δεδομένου ότι το Ευρωκοινοβούλιο ενέκρινε τον περασμένο Δεκέμβριο τη Τελωνειακή Ένωση της Τουρκίας με την Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση. Mrs. Green, after this preliminary introduction for the sake of our Greek viewers, I would like to welcome you to this edition of Δια Ταύτα.
Thank you.
I will even venture a brief translation of Δια Ταύτα, which is to the point or conclusion, and in the course of this discussion we'll try to stick to the more salient points. Our first question invariably centers on the ratification of the customs union, the Turkish customs union. Some time ago there was abuse hurled on some female Euro MPs, and at the time the possibility of a customs union, the Turkish customs union, bordered on the impossible. What happened in between until the resounding vote, really resounding vote of last December, particularly as there were so many human rights preconditions that Turkey had to satisfy?
Well, you know, the issue is a very complex one, and clearly I was one of those female politicians who had abuse hurled at her by a Turkish minister, but frankly, I'm not going to let a political decision be made on the basis of slogan calling and name calling. I treated that remark, as did my colleagues, with the contempt it deserved. What happened over the last year is intense discussions. My group, the Socialist Group, the biggest group in the European Parliament, has spent hour upon hour discussing this issue. We've sent people to Turkey. I myself have been, as you know, others have been. We've had people from Turkey to discuss it with us. We've been very worried, and we remain very worried about the lack of democracy, lack of human rights in Turkey, as well as both the Cyprus problem and the Kurdish issue. Those anxieties have not gone away. But what happened was that the European Parliament, with socialist leadership, laid down three very clear caveats where we wanted to see action from Turkey. And let us be clear that the 15 governments of the European Union didn't try in any way to use the customs union to exercise leverage on democracy and human rights in Turkey. Neither did the European Commission. Yes, of course they say, well, we want to see the improvement of human rights, but we all say that. Here was the customs union, an opportunity to use some leverage, and neither of those institutions of the union did. They left it to the European Parliament.
Did the Parliament do that, Mrs. Green?
Well,
I have a statement made by you here where you say that many voted yes, with sorrow, with heavy hearts, and without enthusiasm. It impresses me that since there was so much lack of satisfaction of these preconditions, how come you pushed ahead with the ratification?
Well, the Socialist Group decision, which was very finely balanced to vote in favour rather than against, was made on this basis. We had put down three caveats. On all of those three caveats, there had been, in the 6 months that the Customs Union had been before the Parliament, there had been some movement on each of them from the Turkish government. Not complete movement, not complete satisfaction on any, but some movement. Now, this was the first time that the European Union and one of its institutions, that is the Parliament, had managed to make some concrete changes. They're not good enough, they don't go far enough, they don't satisfy us, but there was some movement. And my group had to decide, how do we continue to exercise that leverage? Do we do it by saying no to the Customs Union and saying, that's the end of it, we want nothing more to do with you? Or do we do it by saying, okay, now you're telling us you want more from the Union. That means we can still continue to exercise that leverage. And what was also very important is that people on the ground in Turkey, people who are leading the human rights attacks on the Turkish government itself, people who are putting their freedom and sometimes their lives at risk in Turkey itself by pursuing democracy, by pursuing freedom of speech, those people said to us, look, you've done a good job. You haven't succeeded all that you want by any means, we know that. But you've done something, which is more than anyone else has managed. Please say yes now and continue to exercise that.
So it's a vote for the prospects rather than
well, that has,
for the record.
there was some movement on all of these areas. We can't deny that. Not enough. Well, now we want to continue it. And so it's the carrot and the stick. And the Socialist group decided, finally, by a narrow majority, to come down in favour of the carrot. Now, I haven't changed my mind. My view on Turkey remains as ever it did, that we have got to pursue it with all our might to change the democracy, to make it work properly in Turkey, human rights, on the Kurdish issue, and of course on the Cyprus issue. But I'm the leader of the largest group in the parliament, and that group took a decision after many months of intense discussion. And that's why I supported the vote in the parliament as my group had decided.
Well, apart from the specific Cypriot interest in this decision of the parliament, there is, I think, another issue, even more important issue. You know what is said about European institutions, that they present a certain deficit in terms of democracy. And many people in Europe ask for more power for the European Parliament. That is the sole instrument with members elected directly by European people. So don't you think that the position of the Parliament in the question of the Turkish Customs Union undermines the confidence of people to the European Parliament? Because our feeling here in Cyprus, as well as in Greece and I suppose in other countries, was that the Parliament finally acted as a common agency of executive powers of the governments. Because its members could not find the strength to insist on their own views. Because we knew your views, it was views of the European Parliament concerning the preconditions to the ratification of the customs union, and on the other hand, we had that resolution accompanying the ratification, that you admitted that there is a problem with human rights. It was this contradiction. Don't you fear that the European Parliament will have a problem from this point of view?
No, I don't. And you know, when you say that people here in Cyprus were disappointed, that I understand. When you say to me people in Greece were disappointed, I don't understand, because their government signed the customs union. And indeed, even as late as the 30th of October last year, every government in the European Union, not just the Greek, but every government, said they were satisfied with progress in Turkey towards democratic reform, and Turkey was ready for the customs union. So even at that stage, they made no attempt, any of them, to exercise the leverage the customs union offered to insist on further reforms. So it was left to the Parliament. I think the Parliament took a very responsible decision. And I have to tell you, my party, my group, would have preferred that the decision had been postponed. The four groups on the left of the European Parliament would have preferred the decision postponed until later. The four groups on the right, who have a majority of one in the European Parliament, insisted it should be dealt with in December. So we would still have preferred the decision was made later, perhaps after the Turkish election. But it was made. It was on the agenda and we had to take a decision. I think it took a responsible decision. It was a difficult decision. For me, the most difficult political decision of my entire political career. But the fact is that we have to decide, do we support those forces who we want to succeed in Turkey, those who wish to make reforms, those who are putting their lives on the line to try and change things, or do we support the others? Now, of course, there's lots more that's got to be done. This is not sufficient, but there's some progress.
Yes, you mentioned the Greek government's position, which is the same as the Cyprus government's position, that they were in favor of the customs union because there was a sort of package deal, a sort of explanation, tacit explanation, that if we don't pose a problem to the Turkish push for customs union, then there will be an equal treatment of our own wish to proceed with full membership. But that's a government position. That's wholly different. When we're referring to discontent at the popular level, we're basically referring to the fact that human rights seem to have been pushed aside.
No,
but
the human rights haven't been pushed aside. The reason the European Parliament pushed the Turkish government was because of the human rights position in Turkey, in the Kurdish areas and in Cyprus. And we are going to pursue that. Don't think that because the customs union has gone through, all else will be forgotten. My group will establish a monitoring group. Immediately we reconvene in the new year so that we can pursue it and can continue it. And we, for instance, will be pursuing the fact that there are now certain obligations that the Turkish government has taken up in the customs union, for instance, with regard to Cyprus and the recognition of Cyprus and its goods. I mean, that is clear, and we should be making sure that Turkey abides by that commitment.
Realistically speaking, I know that you keep on mentioning the existence of the Cyprus problem. We feel the same way, obviously. But at the European level, do governments and Euro MPs view it actually as a stumbling block for the progress of Euro-Turkish relations? Or is it just we have this view, you have the view because you support Cypriot positions traditionally? Or is it a stumbling block for the Euro Parliament as a whole?
It is a very clear issue when we're discussing relations with Turkey. For instance, Turkey is now saying we want to join the European Union as a full member. No question, that would be unthinkable. Whilst Turkey retains an army of occupation in the north of Cyprus. Unthinkable. How can we have Cyprus and Turkey within the Union when Turkey retains an army of occupation? It's unthinkable. But one thing is clear, the relationship between the European Union and Cyprus is quite independent of Turkey. And there is a clear commitment and a clear conviction now that Cyprus will be the next member state of the European Union, together with the island of Malta. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why in the next 18 months, because that's the period before we're likely to open negotiations with Cyprus, in that period, the European Union will be doing its utmost to try and push for a just and lasting solution to the Cyprus problem.
This position is very clear, and we know that this is the official position of the European Union. However, from time to time we hear from many people, and sometimes from officials, that the final entry of Europe in the European Union depends on the solution of the Cyprus question, of the Cyprus problem. So you confirm that there is no linkage. However, are there any people in European politics trying to disturb this procedure, to disturb this the way of Cyprus to the European Union?
Well, you know, of course,
Turkey, of course.
We hear from Turkey frequently that Cyprus won't join the Union until Turkey joins. This is nonsense. We hear from Mr. Denktash that Cyprus won't join the Union until the problem is solved. This is nonsense. Of course, all of us, you and I, and everybody watching, would prefer Cyprus to join the European Union as one country, united with a proper solution. But if that doesn't happen in the next 18 months, Cyprus will join anyway. This is clear. And I think it's that you will hear these voices.
Clear at the government level.
It's clear at the government level. And I have to say that I think, although I reject the linkage between the customs union and the Cyprus accession, I think in the minds of the governments of the union, there is a clear linkage. And now the customs union vote has been positive, I think it is clear that no government now can argue that Cyprus should in any way be obstructed from coming into the Union. That is clear in the minds of the governments, clear in the minds of the Commission, and I think it's one of the reasons why right at the beginning of this year, just a few weeks after the vote on the customs union, you've had the Italian junior foreign minister here. His visit, I know, has caused some hackles, but nevertheless, it's a clear indication that the European Union is going to pursue its role and its relationship with the next member state of the Union, i.e. Cyprus. And that's the way it should be. And in the next 18 months, we must do all we can through Europe to pursue a solution.
Yes. On the point you made before about Turkish improvement in the domain of human rights, are you satisfied that this is a new beginning? Obviously, if it's a new beginning and Turkey has an improved viewpoint on human rights, this is also positive for Cyprus as well.
Yes.
But of course, one could say that it was just an excuse to get through the customs agreement. And now that they've seen that they can pull it off, they will proceed on the same lines as they did before. And I mean, we have certain statements made by Mrs. Chiller that she will continue trading with the North, for example, which is against European conditions. And also that she will, as you mentioned before, insist on posing problems to the Cypriot move towards full membership.
Yes.
Now, does this portray a country that is moving towards the right direction?
Well, first of all, I hope that that portrayed only parties during an election. because I tell you this, what is clear is that Turkey has undertaken certain commitments within the customs union. Now, you could be right. It could be that what we saw with the changes to the constitution and to the penal code in Turkey was pure political expediency. You could be right. And this was the dilemma which we faced in the European Parliament. Are we convinced that this is, as you say, a new start, a fresh start, a genuine start to democratic reform, or is it purely political expediency to get the customs union? Now, we have opted for the hopeful vision. We could be wrong. I hope very much that we're not wrong and that it will continue. And one of the things that gives me just a little bit of encouragement is that immediately the vote for the customs union went through, Mrs. Çiller and others in Turkey were saying, now we want full membership of the European Union. Well, if they do, if they're serious, then they can't demonstrate political expediency and then ignore everything they agreed in the customs union and expect to come into the union. Clearly that cannot happen. So I hope that simply wanting to come into the European Union, wanting to further their relationship with Europe, will be enough to ensure that that progress continues. Not just on democracy and human rights, which of itself would of course help Cyprus, but that they're going to show a more positive attitude towards solving the Cyprus problem and the Kurdish problem.
Talking about the customs union itself of the Turkey, there are some analysts saying that a country in the condition of Turkey will have many problems. There will be some not only positive effects, but also some negative effects. And they go further saying that maybe this will benefit, maybe some extremists, for example, the Islamists will take advantage, creating an opinion against the European Union, against the European option for the Turkey. How do you think, how do you see this question?
Well, you know, this was discussed in my group at some length because we have these fears. The customs union is actually of significant benefit to European traders. And we fear that there will be an increase in unemployment in Turkey itself, and that this could be the breeding ground for fundamentalists and for the Refah Party to do even better than it did just a few days ago in their election. And it is a significant fear, and one we must be very aware of. The customs union is not a great gift to Turkey in that sense. It could pose very considerable economic problems and therefore social unrest. And this is something we have to be very aware of and keep a very careful eye on in the coming years, because the political developments may not be as some people are expecting them to be. But where you find one view, you will always find the alternative. And so it's a fine balance as to how that's going to go. But it is a view, and it is something that has been expressed clearly in my group, and we are very concerned about.
In any way, it is linked, the customs union is linked to the management of the, let's call them, modernizing political powers in Turkey.
Yes, but you know, there's always two ways to do things. Now, I would say, and the same thing has happened in France, for instance, where it's clear there have to be reforms in order to deal with taking a modern economy into the next century. There are two ways of doing it. One is by conflict with social partners, with employed people, with trade unions. The other is by negotiation and consensus. I, as a socialist, prefer the second. Some other right-wing governments and parties choose the other. So I would say it's a matter of management, which is what you've just said, about how you arrive at the right sort of modern dynamic economy for the next century.
And actually things are not at all clear in Turkey on the government level. We don't even know who will govern.
Quite.
But I suppose for the Turkish government and for the Turkish politicians, the customs union is seen more for its political aspects rather than the economic aspects. I suppose they see it as a first step towards full membership. Now, some analysts say that that borders on the impossible, because some say that the European Union, as you know, may be a Judeo-Christian club, an exclusive club. Do you see that there is a prospect, an actual prospect, a realistic prospect of Turkey actually, a reformed Turkey, becoming a member of the European Union?
Well, I'm not going to say yes or no to that. What I will say is that I personally reject the view that the European Union is a Judeo-Christian club. I think Europe and European integration is available for all countries who subscribe to what we call the acquis communautaire, the body of legislation that brings Europe together and that holds Europe together, that subscribes to a proper participating democracy, and that has the sort of economy on which the European Union is based. I don't think it is based on culture,
It's not
on
based
religion,
on culture.
on religion. It is based on those norms and values that hold us together within the European Union. If Turkey subscribes to those, it is as welcome into the European Union as any other country within the generally accepted continent of Europe. And I think that's the point. It isn't based on religion or culture. It is based on those other things. And by virtue of already accepting an application from Turkey, which happened some years ago, there is a clear view that at some stage Turkey may be acceptable into the European Union. And so I think that view, which is held by some people, that a Muslim country, let us be frank, what we're saying, what some people say is a Muslim country cannot join the Union. I reject that. I don't think it's appropriate. I don't think it's right. The European Union that I believe in is not one based on religion.
So basically the restriction you put on membership for the European Union is purely geographical, as I understand it, and the satisfaction, of course, of certain economic conditions.
Yes, and democracy, of course. Democracy, human rights, a proper functioning economy, a proper participating democracy,
Doesn't all
these
of this
issues, and acceptance of the acquis
lead in
communautaire.
a way to a cultural common denominator? Even a minimal common denominator?
Yes, you deny the cultural factor, but I think you take culture in another sense, because there is also political culture. You
Well,
talk
I think,
about...
yes, I think we're mixing the two. I think we're mixing culture and religion, which are not necessarily the same. I don't think that Europe is a Judeo-Christian club. I reject that analysis.
Yes.
Of course, there are shared values and cultural norms, and that is clear.
Well, talking about culture, about differences in cultures, we hear a lot lately about the strategic role of Turkey as an obstacle to the expansion of Islamist fundamentalism. And because this country is considered in Europe and in the United States as a model of a Muslim society organized in a Western-type democracy. Do you share this view? Do you believe that this is the valuable role of the Turkey, and this makes the Turkey precious to the Western powers, or is something else?
Well, the Western powers clearly regard Turkey as crucially important in this region of the world. I mean, we've all seen that, we've all recognized it, we all understand it. And that's why they were very keen that we should give encouragement to those who saw Turkey looking westwards rather than eastwards. And that was the significance of the customs union for many countries within the European Union. So, okay, we want Turkey to look westwards rather than eastwards. I have to say that my own view is that the issue about Turkey becoming a fundamentalist republic itself is rather overplayed. I don't think there is a danger at this moment of Turkey becoming an Iranian-style republic. I don't believe that. And I think it's overplayed, and was probably slightly overplayed, frankly, by Mrs. Chiller. She went all around Europe telling people that this was what would happen if the fundamentalists won. Well, they did achieve the highest vote in Turkey, and I think we shall see that it is not the case that this is what's going to happen. But it's clear that Turkey is an important regional power, and the governments of the European Union perceive that, as well as the governments of the United States. And of course they are a secular democracy. They don't have a proper functioning democracy, in my view, and that is still to be developed. If they continue to develop it, then it will be a very significant success for this region and for stability and peace in this region of the world. And that's why we have to encourage them to continue down that path.
I read some statements of yours in relation to the crucial vote in December, where you make reference to the geopolitical position of Turkey and to how important Turkey is, which is very related to what you just said right now. And this rings a bell, reminds me of North Atlantic vocabulary. And I was wondering whether you've adopted the philosophy, which is basically adopted by NATO and basically right-wing parties who have a different global viewpoint, a realpolitik viewpoint on these matters.
Well, I don't think it's right-wing to realistically look at this region and see the position of Turkey within it. You can't avoid recognising the importance of Turkey within this region. I don't think that's a right-wing philosophy. I am very implacably opposed to the human rights abuses that go on, etc., etc. I've said all that before, and that's what we must pursue. No country is acceptable as a full partner in the European family if it continues to abuse human rights of its own people, let alone those of people here in Cyprus. And those are the issues that we shall pursue. I don't think that's a right-wing philosophy to recognise the role and the importance of Turkey in this region.
Well, talking about political norms and political values, well, you belong to the greater socialist family. From what you know, is there any significant difference between socialists or other leftists and the official state policies on human rights, on the Cyprus question, or on the question of the Kurdish people in Turkey? I mean, from time to time, we have the impression that in Turkey, these things do not function exactly in the way we know them in Europe. For example, we know that the prime minister that executed the invasion in Cyprus was a socialist. It was Mr. Bülent. So can we analyze the internal situation in Turkey exactly in the terms of left and right, or there is in Turkey something more general, more national policy covering everything on these issues?
Well, you know, in every country there are always issues which unite political parties on national lines. You have a problem here which fairly much unites across the political spectrum on the need to resolve the Cyprus problem. And that will certainly also be the case in Turkey. But we, within the socialist family, have a sister party in Turkey, and we try very hard to keep in regular dialogue with them so that we can exercise some, if not influence, at least they know the way that the socialist family in Europe feels, and they certainly know how we feel about democracy and human rights in Turkey and about the Cyprus problem and the Kurdish issue. We've had a regular dialogue with them. We don't agree with them. They don't agree with us. But we will continue to pursue the case to make sure that it is clear that the socialist family is incidentally united in the rest of Europe about how Turkey should respond on some of these issues. And we have, let us also be fair, the Social Democrat Party in Turkey has had the issue of democracy on its agenda for longer than any other political party in Cyprus. It's been in Turkey, sorry, it's been campaigning for democratic reform in Turkey for the last 3 or 4 years as a matter of a public platform. So yes, our sister party is at least doing that, and we recognise that. And we want to help them and support them to continue that. So, you know, you can say, well, it isn't the same as other countries. Of course, it has certain issues which nationally they perceive as being ones of great importance to them. I will pursue that with my socialist and social democrat colleagues in Turkey, as I would do wherever I felt that a socialist or social democrat party was seeing something in a way that I didn't perceive as wholly in line with the way I as a socialist see things.
Well, we keep open our agenda, but at this point we have to make a break for some commercials, and we will continue just after some minutes. Κυρίες και κύριοι, σε αυτό το σημείο θα κάνουμε ένα μικρό διάλειμμα για τις απαραίτητες διαφημίσεις.
Κυρίες και κύριοι, πάλι μαζί, εδώ στο στούντιο, μαζί με την κυρία Pauline Green, Αγγλίδα Ευρωβουλευτή και αρχηγό της Σοσιαλιστικής Ομάδας στο Ευρωκοινοβούλιο. Mrs. Green, we have been talking about the European Union having a position, having a view on certain global issues, the Cyprus problem, democracy in Turkey. Now, particularly for Cyprus, is there any possibility of the European Union assuming an important role? Does it have that capacity? Because we see that in the Yugoslav crisis, there was a deficit in that, from that point of view. And we had to expect then an American intervention. Does this prove that the European Union is rather weak? Particularly, we've been hearing lately that they were thinking of sending an observer to participate in the negotiations in Cyprus. Can this be something substantial?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I think that Europe has a very important role to play with regard to Cyprus. And why? Because, not just because Cyprus is a European island, not just because Cyprus is sitting there with a division in its island, but because Cyprus will be the next member of the European Union. Absolutely. I mean, those are obviously very important issues, but Cyprus is going to be the next member state of the European Union. Now, the European Union would obviously prefer that Cyprus joined the Union once we had found a solution. We all want that. And we've got 18 months now before negotiations begin. This is the generally accepted timetable. And of course, the European Union now has to develop a relationship with the next member state of the Union. And part of that has got to be to put every effort it can into trying to solve the Cyprus problem. And so, of course, there's a legitimate and real role for the European Union. Now, with regard to Bosnia, everybody says, look, the Union failed on Bosnia. It was a failure. I accept it was a failure. But what I also believe is that the Union could never have succeeded in Bosnia, because the Union doesn't have a proper foreign policy competence that would have allowed it to intervene in any way that would have been successful. So it was doomed to failure, sadly, very sadly. But on Cyprus, Cyprus is going to be a member of the Union, so we have a legitimate role. The cards, if you like, are ours, and we must play with them, and we must do what we can to try and find a solution. And I think that's why, straight away, this year, the Italian presidency have demonstrated that they want to start looking at what the role should be for the Union, because that's what I think the Italian foreign minister's visit here was about, finding out legitimately what role Europe could play, and now I hope we'll get on and play it.
Talking about next members in the European Union, and I will take advantage of your Maltese origins. So we have to talk also about Malta. That is, compared to Cyprus, to the Cyprus problem, it is a normal country. However, it is a small state, very small state. Do you think that European Union membership is sufficient in terms of security for those very small states, that it can be a good umbrella secure in these countries?
Well, yes, I think it can. I think the European Union offers a legislative framework of guarantees which are very useful for small countries. Guarantees to its people of their security, of their human rights, of their democracy. It offers them a democratically elected parliament to which they can send their members. It offers them a framework guaranteed by the Court of Justice which they can apply to if their rights have been infringed. I think it offers a lot of that. Malta is very small. It's half the size of Cyprus in terms of its population. And you say it's just a normal country compared to Cyprus. Well, of course it is. And I very much hope that Malta will become a fully functioning member of the European Union at the same time as Cyprus. I hope that will happen. But of course Malta has a problem in that certainly it doesn't have political unanimity about its European vocation. The political parties in Malta are divided about whether they should join the Union or not. That is not the case in Cyprus, where there is complete agreement here, virtually complete agreement that Cyprus should be a member of the Union.
Given this framework, do you think that the European Union could accept any exceptions from what is known as the acquis communautaire in the case of Cyprus, related to,
yes,
a solution of the problem?
Well, look, people put this question to me often, and you know, if a solution to the Cyprus problem is acceptable to the Cypriot people, Greek and Turkish, if it's acceptable to both of them, it's going to be acceptable to the European Union. Because any solution which doesn't give full respect for human rights to the Cypriot people is not going to be acceptable to them. So if it is acceptable to Cypriots, then of course it will be acceptable to the European Union.
Of course, some Cypriot politicians discuss it the other way around, in the sense that if it's a bad solution, it might be remedied in the context of our membership of the European Union. And that's the center point of the discussion. But let me ask you something more practical. I know that there was a delegation regarding the enclave people's problem
Yes.
to the European Parliament in December.
Yes.
Now there's a practical problem which is very much alive,
Yes.
and it's very near death, if I may add.
Yes.
Is there any practical aid the European Parliament may offer, or the European Union may offer, in the context of the enclave people, the people who live under occupation in the north?
Well, you're right. This is a very practical demonstration. On these issues, let's be frank, Cyprus is not in the Union at the moment. On these issues, the European Parliament and the European Union has very little role that it can positively play. It can't force any changes with regard to the enclave people. But what we can do is to expose and to identify exactly the conditions under which they're living. And I hope that following what was a very important visit from representatives of the enclaved with members of Parliament from the House of Representatives, that we will see what we call our Human Rights Subcommittee in the European Parliament actively looking at a visit to the enclave people, actively looking to make clear in their view exactly the conditions under which the enclave live. Because, you know, I was told, and I'm told by Turkish Cypriot politicians, and Mr. Denktash, who writes to me, says that they live perfectly normally, and all the conditions that were required under the Vienna Convention are carried out for the enclaved. And yet when I tried to visit, I was told I couldn't visit the enclaved unless I took Turkish Cypriot representatives with me, and unless I talked to Turkish Cypriot politicians as well. So where is the freedom of these people to live as other free people live?
And it's a very
There is
important
none.
issue, something that is also contained in the Vienna Agreement, that the population must be restored to its prior numbers.
Yes, I know.
Because if you leave there are 3 people living under pseudo-normal conditions, then that's obviously inadequate.
Well, I agree with you. And any society that stops children returning home to visit their parents in the way that we see done here clearly is reprehensible. And there are all sorts of ways in which we can demonstrate clearly that these people are under intense pressure and that all the pressure is on them to leave. If that's not the case, then let people go back and forth to visit them freely, openly, without them having people listening to the conversations that are going on over their shoulder. And there's a simple way to prove that these people are free and living in dignity and with respect, and that's to leave people freely to go and visit them. They can't visit them freely, and I think that speaks volumes and speaks for itself. But we shall pursue it in the European Parliament. I've sent a dossier to the Human Rights Subcommittee. I've asked them to pursue it. We've now spoken, and representatives of the enclave have spoken with this subcommittee, and I hope we're going to see at least some action. So we can expose. We can't force. We don't have the ability to do that. Cyprus is not in the Union yet, but we can expose, and that's what we must do.
You, apart from your membership of the European Parliament and membership of the Socialist Group, you're also obviously a member of Labour, and it is by virtue of that capacity that you're a member of the European Parliament. There's a big discussion concerning socialist and Labour policy in Cyprus, and some people say that there is a distinction between conservative policy and Labour policy in Cyprus. Now, the opposite view puts forward the very simplified point that during the invasion there was a Labour government. I also have here a title in the Times where it is said UK, Labour rescues deal with Turkey. And basically the contents of the article state that Labour was instrumental, and particularly Tony Blair, in rescuing the customs union. Now, in view of this, can we refer to a distinction between conservative and Labour policy on Cyprus?
Well, yes, of course you can. I mean, if you want to refer it back to the customs union, we go back where I said earlier. The parties on the right in the European Parliament, of which the British Conservatives are members, those parties voted, for instance, to ensure that the vote on the customs union was in December. The groups on the left would have delayed it. So you can see immediately that there's a clear distinction in our approach to this issue, and that's a clear demonstration, I think, that there's a difference. On substance, there is also a very great difference. We have had, for 17 years now, a Conservative government in the United Kingdom. In my view, they have done nothing to progress the issue of the Cyprus problem and a solution to it. I accept there was a Labour government at the time of the Turkish invasion. I think it's greatly to our discredit that we did nothing as a Labour government at that time to prevent the invasion, to use British forces to prevent the invasion. I think it's a part of our history that we should be very ashamed of. Nevertheless, now, and we're talking about 21 years later, a new leader for the Labour Party, the last 3 leaders consecutively have all said that our policy and approach to Cyprus is quite different from that of the Conservatives. We've been pursuing membership of the European Union for Cyprus, whereas the Conservatives have said over and over that they would not have Cyprus in the Union until there was a solution to the Cyprus problem. The only thing that's now made a difference to them is the deal on the customs union with Turkey. So there is a clear difference, and it is very clear in the United Kingdom where that difference lies. It's generally so, the divide between right and left. In the European Parliament, without question, the parties on the right, to which some of your parties on the right here are allied, were clear in supporting the customs union from the beginning. It was clear the European People's Party were supporting the customs union. It was clear the socialists were the ones who were saying, just a minute, human rights, democracy, Cyprus, the Kurdish issue, let's stop, let's work on it, let's think. So be clear, there's a very, very distinct difference in approach. And I think it's clear, I don't think there's any problem whatsoever. Our policy as a Labour Party on the Cyprus problem has been clear for a long time.
So we can expect a continuation and implementation of this policy with Tony Blair in government if Labour becomes government?
Indeed
because
you can.
it is said that Tony Blair is more to the centre, that there's been a change in the ideological viewpoint of the Labour Party under Blair, and maybe that would influence also their viewpoint on global affairs.
Well, Tony Blair is the leader of the Labour Party, and anyone who has listened to him talking about the ethics that should underlie political decision-making will know only too well that the issues that are important to him are justice, fairness, democracy, freedom, and those are the ones that will underpin the foreign policy of the British Labour government. And anyone who's listened to Robin Cook, who is our shadow foreign minister, and he spoke to the Cypriot community in North London very recently, and he was clear about our policy on Cyprus. No change. We support a solution to the Cyprus problem based on the removal of the invasion and occupying troops, on the principle that the settlers should return to their homes, free movement, free settlement for Cypriots, both Turkish and Greek.
Here in Cyprus, we are used to mention the intergovernmental conference in relation to the negotiations for full membership that will follow. The conference itself is, however, very important for the future of the European Union itself. How do you see the expected changes in the institutional framework of the Union?
Well, this is a very important issue, and it's one of the issues that I have brought my bureau, that is the 25 leading socialist members here, to Cyprus to discuss with our sister party, ADEC, because we want to engage Cypriots now in the discussion on the future of Europe. And we've brought with us political leaders from the socialist group, but also those experts on economic and monetary issues in the European Union, single currency, a huge issue for the development of Europe, foreign affairs and the relationship there, regional affairs, which will very much affect Cyprus when it joins, and a host of other issues, the environment. All these issues are very important. And of course it's going to be crucial that we develop the right sort of Europe for the future. And for us, the socialist group, we spent 6 months working through our position, the sort of Europe we want to see into the future. We then pursued our position in the Parliament, and the European Parliament's position on next year's or this year's intergovernmental conference is almost entirely our position paper, because we won our position in the Parliament. We want a Europe, first of all, that is more relevant to its people, because this is the problem that Europe now has, that there is a growing distance between the institutions of the Union and its policies and the people of the Union. So it's got to deal with the issues that matter to people. And you're very fortunate here in Cyprus you don't have an unemployment problem. But in the rest of Europe there's a significant one. And Europe has got to deal with the issue of unemployment. 17.5 million unemployed Europeans. We've got to put them back to work. And Europe's got to demonstrate its commitment to that. We've got to deal with things like making sure Europe is understandable to its people, is simple to, you know, there are 21 decision-making processes in the European Union. This is crazy. How do I explain to a group of my constituents the 21 processes to pass a law? It can't be done. We want to simplify it to 3. The European Commission agree with us, most of the governments agree with us, so I hope that's going to come out of this.
You seem to assume as a fact that Europe is moving towards a closer relationship. And from what I know, in the UK there is an internal discussion, and there's a very heated discussion, and there is divergence of opinion. It seems that the Conservatives, or a part of the Conservative Party, is against closer ties. Would that create a problem for the British position within the European Union?
It doesn't present a problem for the Labour position within the European Union, which is the one I pursue and the one I support. It certainly presents a huge, devastating, overwhelming problem for the British Conservatives. That is clear. They are divided, grossly divided on this issue. And the debate is at its liveliest in the United Kingdom, largely because of the misinformation that is pursued by what we call Eurosceptics. They frequently misrepresent the views of the European Union. If you listen to what they were saying, you would believe that the whole of the European Union spends all its waking hours trying to pry into every aspect of British life and ban them. I mean, this is complete nonsense. The vision of Europe I'm interested in is one that is pursuing peace. And don't forget, the countries of the Union are countries who've been traditional enemies. Britain and France, Britain and Germany, Germany and France, Spain and Portugal, Sweden and its Nordic neighbours, fought each other for centuries. But in the European Union, they are at peace. So we want to pursue peace, we want to pursue democracy, we want to pursue tolerance, and once again we see the rise of racism and anti-Semitism across our continent, something we thought had died in the ashes of the bunker in Berlin, once again rising its head. So we want to pursue tolerance, we want to pursue success, economic prosperity, particularly for our young people. And also we're aware of the international environment in which we find ourselves. The world is changing dramatically. We want Europe to play a role in that world.
You mentioned the unemployment problem. That is, it's well known that it's the #1 problem in Europe. But from what we see, the European Union advances actually in the path of the monetary union and the financial integration through what is known as the German model. At least some people think that the German way of strict monetary discipline is imposed within the European Union, and it is supposed to create the rules of the game for the future of the Union itself. Many people worry that this policy will worsen social tension without facing the unemployment problem, whilst purely political considerations are somehow mystified by technical economic considerations. Is there a socialist view or any reaction on this question?
Yes. Well, look, first of all, let us be clear. The 12, as they were then, 12 governments of the European Union agreed on the way in which we would move towards economic and monetary union. It wasn't just the German government, it was all 12, and now all 15 have agreed on a certain process to continue towards monetary union. And you know, people blame the European Union for the rise in social tension in some countries, for the rise in economic difficulties, for the rise in unemployment. This is nonsense. If you look at the countries of the Union, for instance, if you look at Sweden, people in Sweden are beginning to blame the European Union for the economic ills of Sweden. And yet, Sweden had an unemployment rate of 11% before it joined the European Union. And now it has a social democrat government that's trying to address that. But that problem was there, as it was in Finland, as it was in other member states of the Union. It wasn't something created by the Union. It's something which we're all experiencing as a result of the change in the global trading environment in which we're living. And that's why I think it's important that we understand what we're trying to build in Europe, the vision we're working to. The world is moving into regional groupings, economic groupings. The European Union is the most developed. And so we have the way, if we can continue and hold ourselves together through difficult economic circumstances, which they are, we have the opportunity to present a model of government, of cooperation between states, which will be of great value to other parts of the world. Now, unemployment is the most serious issue for us. And we believe, and there's a very definite socialist response to this, we believe that in this year's Intergovernmental Conference, they have got to give the same political priority to dealing with unemployment as they've given to dealing with economic and monetary union. The two things are not in competition. They've got to be dealt with the same degree of importance and priority. And our Swedish colleagues, and it's our sister party in Sweden, the Socialist Party, have come forward with a way of actually doing that. Look, socialist and social democrat governments across the European Union have been responsible for the welfare states in the countries of the Union. We fought for them over 50 years. We built them. We wanted them. We created them. Now we recognise they have to change in order to make our countries viable into the next century. But we developed them, we believe in them, and we will keep them. Reform them, yes. We'll reform the welfare state, the social dialogue, the social structures, but we will keep it and we will pursue it into the next century, and Europe can help that.
You seem to be posing a vision on the way Europe can go forward. A very respectable vision, but at the same time an ambitious and optimistic vision. And you tend to play down national differences. There are those, of course, who indicate German threat of domination in the Union, the French-German axis working in consonance and creating a lobby, a very important presence in the Union. Isn't that a real threat? Because you don't mention any national differences. You don't mention any threat of national domination within the Union. Is that, maybe that's a bit unrealistic. Maybe there is such danger in the sense that most countries introduce their own interests in the Union and insist on pushing them forward. They do not seem to have this visionary viewpoint you have.
Well, you're right. Of course, every country has its own national interest, which it must pursue, rightly pursue. There's no reason why those national interests can't be pursued. We have no desire to create a Euro person. Clearly, a Dane doesn't want to be like a Greek, a Spaniard doesn't want to be like a Brit. There are things that are precious to every single country that we must retain. We don't want to lose those precious things. But there's a lot that we share in common that we can pull for the good of all. It's finding the right balance. It's a very delicate balance, and we've got to find the way of bringing together what's common and good for us all, but at the same time retaining those things which are precious to each country and which gives Europe its beauty, which makes Europe so diverse and so wonderful. Culture, language, history, tradition, food. It's wonderful. We don't want to standardise that and do away with that. It's what makes Europe strong. We're trying to do something entirely new. Create a new economic and political relationship for the next century, which has never been tried before, by bringing together states from strength, not from weakness, not because they're forced together from war, from oppression, but because they're coming together out of their own free will, because it's the right thing for their people, and it doesn't threaten their people. Now, it's a very difficult thing to do, and it's a hard... No one said it would be easy. I mean, for goodness sake, to get a decision from 15 countries on even a recipe law for jam, I mean, it's incredibly difficult. But it can be done if we take it with the right approach, if we're sensible, and if all of us are prepared to give and take. Now, domination. I don't believe that if you've got 15 countries agreeing together that you're going to get domination. Of course, some countries are bigger than others, more powerful than others. But take, for instance, Cyprus's position, where it is in the Mediterranean, with its very strong expertise, knowledge, experience, and relationship with the Middle East. Now, how valuable that will be within the European Union. And in that context, big and small becomes meaningless. Because you have that experience, which we don't have. Even Britain doesn't have, and Germany doesn't have. You have it. So your voice becomes important within the European Union and in its development and in the peace and stability we bring to all those countries around us. So I don't think there'll be domination unless we allow it to happen. There's more likely to be domination if Europe breaks up. If a country with the power and the strength of Germany goes off on its own, where is that going to take us? That's my fear. And I think it's the fear of all of those of us that want to see Europe coming together for the good of its people, but retaining those things that are precious to all of us.
Although we are ready to agree with your point of view, especially that the wealth of Europe is in in the different traditions, in the combination, in the multiculturalism, etc. However, there is another question related to what George Kolokasidis said before. We know that the next stage of the monetary union will create two different groups of countries. You talk all the time about 15 countries. However, we know that in some years we will have two groups working separately in some areas, in some questions. Don't you think that this is an obstacle? This is towards your vision, towards your way of looking?
Well, you know, there are already, within the Union, there are already countries working at different speeds on different things. For instance, on the social dimension, the United Kingdom has opted out of the social dimension. There are 14 in and 1 out. On the free movement of people and the